Thanks for putting up my slide. And thanks for the introduction. Thank you for being here this morning on this last day of our wonderful conference, and even after the beautiful dinner last night. I saw some pictures of people dancing, and I really appreciate you being here anyway. A heartfelt thank you for the local organizing committee and the international organizing committee for inviting me to share my work. See if I can make this work. Yes. So who am I? I'm Pleun Hermsen. I'm from TU Delft, and I come from a non-traditional professional background. I've explored some different studies after my after my high school and before my medical education. I became a trauma surgeon and then decided to go for a career in education and follow my passion. I started working at TU Delft, I think about 10 years ago, for the technical medicine program. It's a bachelor and master program that educates technical physicians, sort of. It's half a doctor, half an engineer. There's more to tell about that, but I'm going to leave it for now. When some of you were already visiting before, I asked you to fill out this thing and maybe discuss it with your neighbor, and I did so myself. So where am I from? I'm from the Netherlands, and I have had a lot of formative professional years in healthcare before going into the engineering education and engineering. And what's really stereotypical of me is that being Dutch, I like to cycle, but also coming from medicine, I like to be reflexive, as you would hope your doctor would be. But when I transferred to another field, to engineering, I realized that I was more reflexive than others, and maybe also thought about reflection in a different way, and that it was maybe more natural for me than for many others in my field, both in engineering and in medicine. And from that, and being submerged into engineering, I realized that the importance of reflection was way bigger than just my preference. And I started to use reflection to put it more meaningfully in our education, first in my own teaching, but also in my faculty, within a mentoring program, and with other teachers. I co-created reflective activities. And the urgency that I felt that we need to do more and more relevant reflection was echoed by others. And in 2022, I got the chance to start my program, The Reflective Engineer. And in this program, we wanted to embed authentic reflection within our disciplinary education, and that we wanted to do that across TU Delft. And my work that I present here today is or originates from practice. So it's not been researched, but it's from practice. And what are we going to do today? We were getting started doing that. We need to talk about, if we want to re-engineer it first, why do we need reflection in the first place? And how did we, TU Delft, approach this, and what can we learn from the Reflective Engineer program? So, how is reflection being used in practice now, and also how can you change that, or how can you also think about reflection? And how, if you think about the way that I think about reflection, you need to understand where we need to reflect on, and how we create that in our teaching, and that's about the process and the conditions of reflection. You are handed this booklet. I put down the topics, so you will not get lost during this talk, hopefully at least. So if we think about re-engineering reflection, why do we need reflection in the first place? And for me, it boils down to this, that the role of an engineer has changed. I know that we discussed this already in a lot of our talks and in the presentations, but from my Dutch perspective, this is an example of it, where cycling might have been a problem that could be treated as a pure mechanical one and could just be solved by applying the laws of physics. If you're working in cycling today as an engineer, you need to take so much more into account. things about cost, legislation, safety, equitable sourcing materials, carbon emission, consumer wishes, maybe even use the use of data from your users and your customers. And also in the opening talk of Carl Eric, and in the last, the keynote from Shannon and Tom, we heard this as well. Engineers need to work on complex problems in a social, technical, ecological society where they cannot treat it solely as a pure mechanical or a problem that is pure from the laws of physics. They need to take all other stuff into account, and I'm not going to repeat them, but I want to echo that as well. So looking at engineering, where things used to be simple problems, maybe like a single strand of spaghetti that you could isolate and work on, it's just a heap of spaghetti, where if you start working on one strand, all the others change as well. And engineers need to relate to that. They need to relate to the complexity, the multiple perspectives, the power dynamics, the minoritized voices, the dominant norm, and all of these other aspects. Make it a little bit more easier for me to see it. So this is maybe what we know, we've heard it already, but it's also still a very abstract thing and maybe far away. So what does it mean for you in your education? So maybe we can make it a little bit smaller and we can go to this booklet, because I know 45 minutes is a really long time to listen to someone. So I try to make it interactive, so I hope you will engage with me in that. So my first question would be, what have you observed as a change? So name one change in engineering that you observed in your context, and does this change require the students, where does this work, to broaden their understanding or the system around the problem, or think about downstream effects, etc. I'll give you 2 minutes for this, and it starts now. Stop. It's always difficult to estimate the time, but I think we're going to stop and get you back with me. I hope you came up with this change that's happening in your education, and if we can agree to that the role of an engineer has been changed or is changing, then it might also necessary that we should change education too. So in my view, we should do that. And the problem is, what do they need to learn then if they need to engage in all sort of these complex activities? It's not a single skill that engineers need to learn. There are so many skills important to develop this wide set of skills and competencies. And this is just an overwhelming thing. This is a list of skills that I wrote down from my perspective, but this list might not fit completely in your context and you can adopt it in any way. And there probably will never be a definitive list of skills an engineer should need because it's context, depends on context. So there's a lot and it's so much to do, but how do we do that? Do we need to make 2 bachelor and master programs, one for the disciplinary skills and one for the transferable skills? It's just, there's so much to do, so little time. How do we prioritize? Where do we start? All these kind of questions. It is a somewhat overwhelming problem. So, and how do we deal with that the one person might grasp the resilience part pretty quickly because they come from a background where they needed to develop that anyway, and another person is struggling with it, or someone who can already need to work on his perseverance, and the other person needs to let go a little. So in Delft, we have those questions too. On the one hand, we feel the tension between the agreement for educating socially responsible engineers, and we also see the responsibility of our university in that. And at the same time, there's a need to educate students efficiently. Government just asks us to, and therefore, many teachers feel reluctant to give away credit or to stop doing, as Arja mentioned. And a lot of these skills are outside of the zone of confidence and comfort for many educators. And there are other complicating factors. Educational change is difficult and hard to achieve and slow process. And there's not one educational intervention where all students can learn all these skills. That's not possible. So we try to find a way around this inherent tension, and we focused on reflection as the foundational skill, the one that's essential in educating all other skills and socially responsible engineers. Because without reflection, how would you know the limitations of your work, or question the epistemology of your field? Or how do you question a power balance, anticipate environmental consequences, or question your own assumptions, and when working in other disciplines? So we see the skill from reflection as foundational, and we use it to... so, I lost my lines, I'm sorry. It's pretty important here. So we see the skill reflection as foundational, and we use it as a tool in acquiring all these other skills. And visually, from my Dutch perspective, it's sort of a cargo bike. You can load up all the other skills in it, and it gets you to new places. So reflection is not a goal, in our opinion. It's a multi-purpose tool. We use it to jump hurdles that address problems within our disciplinary education, and with that we feed 2 birds with 1 seed. We contribute constructively to those problems, and we have students experience and practice reflection as well. And these problems can be things that it's hard to really do meaningfully. For example, peer feedback, collaboration, or well-being, but also low passing rates. And on the other hand, also in the ethics, in the limitations of our work, in the unintended effects, and looking at our biases. So we want to do that, as mentioned, within the existing education, and we make hurdles. And where we do that within the existing education because it's already there, and it's just more easy than do big educational changes, we want to maximize the learning opportunities there. And the hurdles, I want to explain this with an analogy. Imagine you're walking through the woods and you want to learn more about wildlife. And you walk past this owl, and when you get to the end of the path, you finish the walk, well done, but you did not reach your learning objective, you did not see the owl. And if we're honest, I think that goes for a lot of times in education as well. We let students do group projects, and we want them to learn to collaborate as well. We let them go through the project, and they finish an end result and pass the course. So they received a good grade, and they work together. But they might not have learned the deeper lessons of collaboration, for example, with other people who are not like you. So what we need is we need someone in the woods that makes you stop and see that owl. Take the time, look at it, maybe point it out even. So we also need that in the classroom. Someone who stops, give you a helicopter view, let the students grasp the deeper lessons. So therefore we create these stop moments, the reflective hurdles, and that's our moments that we make the students look around, learn the deeper lessons, and make them see the owls. And I'm curious because we have, especially in our SEFI community, so much already going on in wonderful education that's happening here in SEFI conference, but also in your own context. And students are already seeing a lot of owls, but we want more of those. So I want to ask you if we can learn from that what we're already doing, and have you look at your own expertise. So the second thing that I want you to do is look at a moment where you really felt that students saw the owls, or when you thought, oh, I've put them in, but nobody saw them, or it didn't happen as I intended to. If you're not in a teaching position, no problem. Think about when you yourself were taught, or any other context. But if it's difficult, think about a workshop or a lecture that you had here at SEFI. I'll give you 1 minute. So this 1 minute. I hope you came up with something, and I don't want to run over time as well, so I keep it short. And what we wanted to do in Delft is see if we could make students see more owls. So we started a reflective engineer program in 2022. And in this reflective engineer program, we wanted to change the mindset towards reflecting in our education, in our university, that people would use reflection more often, and then we intended to work for students, educators, faculty, and support staff. And with this small team, we worked over all faculties, at least we tried, and we integrated reflective hurdles within the existing education to make people see those more owls. And we had a lot of program activities. We made tools and we made education. We tried to do that, we facilitated ourselves, and we worked with Teach the Teacher, Train the Trainer program. We try to do that in a systemic way where we make them long-lasting, and that it was not dependent on me or my team to facilitate that. We also try to disseminate the knowledge, and this picture is my first SEFI in Barcelona, where we did our first workshop there. So in this program, we did a lot of bottom-up activities with many reflective educational interventions, and also worked top-down with systemic tweaks, minor targeted interventions to improve the overall mindset towards reflection. For example, we did it in a participatory study, the 100 Days of Reflection, and we got it embedded in the teaching and learning. We worked with the UTQ and collaborated with student councils. And what did we learn from that? There are a lot of stories that we can tell here. We can talk about the strategic change management, we can talk about the systemic way of changing education, but I'm going to leave that for now because it's just too much, and I want to focus today on the tool of reflection and how we design for it. So that's what's next. And when we look at the tool reflection, we might say that there's a problem with it. If you look at reflection in literature, it's mostly very confusing. Might be my perspective alone, but there's so much literature, and reflection is used in so many different fields with many different definitions. The literature is either very specific and really difficult to translate to your own context, or it's very broad and philosophical. And reflection is also difficult to measure because it's such an internal process. So what happens if we start researching it? Sometimes we make the reflection so that it's measurable, and it might have impacted the reflection. And reflection in practice is often a pretty instrumental approach. We explain how important reflection is and why it's needed. We use it as a final assignment or a part of an assessment or a structured exercise. It's mostly in writing, it's mostly about yourself, and it's mostly about improving your performance. Frequently, it's more of an evaluation, and it's a pretty cognitive process in a sort of paradigm of accountability. And of course, this list is an oversimplification. I know that there are many great examples that are out there, but I think we often do see this. And that leads to the following response. Students treat reflection as a checkbox activity, as a chore. They give superficial responses and maybe outsource it to artificial intelligence. So we read a lot of sentences maybe as, next time I will plan better, and I learned the importance of communication, and our teamwork was okay, and the success was because we collaborated well. But as a teacher, you might feel that you doubt the authenticity of it. Anne Delacroix wrote a great article about reflective zombies, and she used the word reflective behavior, of the zombie behavior in reflection, not so much to blame the students, but to dispute the behaviorism of it. And what she's saying, actually, that what we see and grade as reflection is not authentic inner reflection. And that sounds great, right? Authentic inner reflection. What would that be? Could be genuine curiosity having there, or bring out the authentic self, or students that really contemplate and ask question their fundamental assumptions, beliefs, behavior. Might give you new insights, challenge your biases, support deeper understanding, improve further action, etc., etc. But at the same time, we know that it's really difficult to accomplish. You cannot force people to reflect. Chan and Lee did a great review on it, and they had so many important factors that challenge reflection in education, but it's also known from anecdotes. I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and he said, Pleun, reflection, I really think it's important, but it's so hard. I mean, they're just not interested. He was in a lecture hall, and I think 10 years ago, he asked the students to reflect on Putin and his role in the geopolitical role in the energy transition. And he said, I didn't get an answer. So they're just not interested. They really don't want to think about it. I think it might be a little bit different. But so it's hard to achieve. You cannot force it and just ask students to reflect. But on the other hand, we cannot leave it to chance alone, because it's too important. So time to re-engineer it, I think. We need to stop asking questions, asking to reflect, but maybe design the conditions for it to emerge. And what we did in this program, we really started intuitively to develop all kinds of reflective interventions. And we did that together with students and teachers. And we noticed that we intuitively used these kind of elements that were appreciated and worked. So there were things like connect the students to each other and the topic, align what they already are doing or should be doing. We made it accessible, we adjusted the words, we let them keep stuff private so they didn't need to share everything. We let them choose where to reflect on. We helped them formulate a take-home message, etc., etc. And I want you to ask you if with the element that you, of the example that you had before, maybe it's interesting to see where the elements of these lists that in hindsight contributed to the reflection or maybe challenged it. So look at the moments that you identified when students did see the owl, and were there elements that are presented here that were present, that helped to do it. Signal if it's not if you don't understand what I'm asking. I'm going to bring you back again. Maybe you saw some elements that were there, could have helped, but we understood that our intuitive list was not really going to help other teachers do more meaningful reflection in their education. So what we did try to look at what's the underlying structure beneath it. So we created an overview of what we think that reflection should be, and I want to start with giving you explain something about the infinity symbol that I used, also in the title. It feels a little pretentious maybe to have this infinity symbol there, or you might be worried that you need to reflect until infinity. That's not what I intend to do. I just wanted to have like an adjective. I wanted to stay away from adjectives, no, whatever, that were really normative, like transformative reflection or meaningful reflection or critical, or all the stuff that you might have already have an opinion about or a view on, and it's pretty normative. So this is why we chose this symbol of the infinity. It relates to something in a process, and we will discuss that later on. So what we do in this, when we see reflection, looking at our vision of reflection, First, we acknowledge that reflection has many different definitions. And reflection might have a personal definition and is also personal. And it might be contextual, because in the one department you're allowed to reflect and own up to your mistakes, and in the other part it's frowned upon if you do that. So we acknowledge that it's all there and it can exist side by side. So we stayed away from defining reflection, and also in this keynote, I accept the pluriformity of it and I'm not defining it. We see that reflection has a broad scope, one of the things that we find important, and I'll talk about that later on. We want reflection to be in depth. It needs to deal about your beliefs, your norms, your values. It needs to involve emotions and your intuition. And it needs to have multiple perspectives. So it's about your own perspective, but it's also about other people's perspective. And it's about you, but it's also about us, because we're just one small part of a bigger whole. And when we put this reflection in education, there are things that we already mentioned. I embedded it as a hurdle, but we wanted to be able to facilitate by a regular teacher. And we wanted to point out that it's not in contradiction with all the existing work that we're all doing, for example, in ethics or in PBL or CBL, but it's more of a tweak to it. I also leave those topics to be, but I want to focus on the broad scope of reflection and the conditions to make that happen. So looking at reflection in detail. This booklet, and I saw that some of you were already doing it. If you open it up, then there's this framework on it. And the first thing that's really important is that reflection is about perspective. And perspective is not something that people frequently know, but we all have a perspective. It shapes the way you see as normal, and it shapes the way you see and experience things. And perspective gives rise to assumptions, to misunderstanding, etc. And a quick, easy way to describe this perspective is traveling time. For one person, an hour might be much. For another, it might be a little. On Sunday, we had this discussion that apparently if you're from Australia, 5 hours is a very short time to travel. And if you're from the Netherlands, I think an hour is long. And if you look at that perspective more closely, you need to acknowledge it, and you need to take a look at what is in there. And perspective is about your roots. It's where you were born, the family that you grew up in, the part of the training that you had. It's about your context, the context from how and your work environment, the place where you live, the dominant norm in the work environment. It's obviously also about your culture, but also what role your culture or your country plays in the world. It's also about resources, the resources that you have financially, but maybe also if you're able-bodied or not. It just has an effect on how you experience things. It's about the environment, the world around you. You might have a different take on air pollution if you're living in the countryside versus when you're living next to a highway. And it's about, of course, your experiences. And the one feeds into another, and vice versa. And then you need to reflect on something. I mean, you don't reflect in a vacuum. And we formulated some categories to facilitate this work to think about, and not so much to isolate or separate them. So they are not completely distinctive categories. But there's a category of learning where you can reflect on, about your motivation, your attitude, for example. It's about the interaction that you have with other people, but also with objects or certain changing circumstances. It's about collaboration that you have, the processes that you work in, and the work that you're making, the product. So that's the focus of reflection. And we see that reflection is on the outside world. You want to relate to the world outside because you're just one of many. And that's about individuals, about community, about society, about the world, about ecosystem. And it's really important that you think about your effect on others, but also have the others impact you and take the perspective of others into account. And you need to be actively looking for that, because most of the impact that you have is indirect. You don't have the impact that you have is without direct input. So this is the extensive scope of reflection. And it's also interesting maybe to see that from your the perspective in your context, where are students already reflecting on meaningfully? So are they and you can mark that with an X, and or you would like them to reflect more meaningfully on. So that's the next part where I want you to think about. So what is already happening, and what would be good to add? That's about a minute again. So this reflection that we envision, we have this extensive scope, and it's intensive in depth. And to get that intensity in depth, you need to focus on a topic and not do everything every time. You need to take the personal aspect into account, the perspective, but also have the other perspectives there. But that leads to the how question, because nice to have an intensive, nice to have depth in your reflection, but how? And that's why we want to focus. I want to tell you about how we see that as the conditions of reflection. So remember this random list that I gave you. When we were reflecting on our work and distilling, trying to distill it, we saw that it was not so much a random list, but were more surface aspects of an underlying blueprint. And this underlying blueprint, we try to distill this in a framework, which is also in your booklet. And reflection, as we see, it needs a process on the one hand, and it needs a setting where that process will work. And together, it creates the conditions of possibility. So going through the process. The process has 5 steps. First, you need students to embark on the process. Then they need to experience a disruption. Then you want to have them have a dialogue, and that's where the infinity symbol comes from, slightly different oriented. You want them to consolidate their insights, and you want them to transfer that to a regular context. And this is a challenging process. This first, the embarkation. That lays the foundation for the rest. In our experience, you should never think, well, this group knows each other so well, or they don't need it, or they're all adults, they can do that by themselves. You really need to invest time in this. And the embarkation it helps students or individuals connect to each other and connect to the topic that you're discussing. It builds trust, and you sensitize them for the topic, and it's to individually connect to the topic, but also as a group. This is an example that we did for embarkation. We did a reflective exercise with teachers about the appropriateness of their teaching for different types of students, knowing that most of the education is a best fit for the hard worker and the overachiever. And we made the teachers introduce themselves by thinking back about their own study time and taking 2 or maybe 3 archetypical students, which they were themselves in their study time. And what happened was that they saw that a lot of their esteemed colleagues were not the hard workers, but they might have been the class clowns. And even when you have been a class clown, you can be a good colleague. So a little later, we asked them to reflect on how their teaching was to facilitate other types of students. And they were more open to and more inclined to adapt to their design towards more types of students. And then the next step is the disruption. And what we want to do there is that we create a tension, that you experience it as a disruption when you think, my normal is not the only normal possible. Apparently, other people think something differently. And we need to make it undeniably so that their truth is not the only truth possible. And then, if that's the case, a change within oneself is needed to make this coherent again. So this is an example of disruption. We had people, this was an overview of input from different educators in this case. The blue post-its were the topics that they themselves reflect on. The pink topics were topics that students were reflecting on, and in the yellow, they were the topics that they felt future engineers should reflect on. And the disruption occurs because what you think that an engineer should reflect on is not what we make them do. And it's not only what you don't make them do, but your colleagues are not doing it either. So if you really think that, then you might need to change your ways of working or readjust your ambition. That's also possible. But so you start to maybe behave differently afterwards. The next step is the dialogue between perspectives. What we want them is to go back and forth between their own perspective and the perspective of someone else, or the other perspectives. And that's more to say that they understand the other perspectives better. It's to hear, understand, and learn from it, and not to position or convince. And we did that. You can do that, for example, by adding in other aspects or changing the context where it is. You can do all kinds of small steps where they can have a dialogue. This is an example where we made people have a dialogue with fictive perspectives. Some of you might have done this workshop before with me. And it's about you gaining insight in your own behavior by discussing this with fictive characters. And it could be about something from your regular day life. We asked people to think about if you're becoming ill and you have deadlines approaching, what would you do? Some people might work harder, other people might call in sick. They're all perfectly normal ways of doing this. But if you're talking to Pippi Longstocking, for example, or Iron Man, or Anansi the spider, what can you learn from that? And it's not so much that you need to learn from Pippi that you can ignore rules, but it's much more if you talk to 3 different fictional characters, you might understand, apparently I take rules very seriously, and it might not always be necessary. And what we also do in that context, you transfer it to another context. The last thing is we want you to consolidate and transfer, and people to collect their individual lessons and connect it to something outside. Maybe sometimes have a memento. So this might be the booklet that you're having now, but also these kind of cards that we gave after a workshop where they could put in something that they learned. We gave them choice, So we didn't say they needed to learn something, but we gave them choice in what to adopt to it. And then what's the follow-up after this reflection process? We're used to very cyclical processes of reflection. But I see that a little differently because reflection resists repeating. You cannot enter the same cycle again because the same disruption will not be disruptive anymore. So therefore, you need to take whatever your insights are, you take it with you and you go into a new process somewhere else. So in summary now, we have this reflection with a broad scope and a depth in use, and it needs conditions to emerge. So it needs a process that I explained, but it also needs a supportive setting. This my final bit will be about that supportive setting. Why is it difficult for this? Because it's very personal learning in a group, in a professional setting. For students to engage in this, or for us to engage in it, it's not simple enough to say, start embarking and disrupt yourself. That's just not possible. So we need to balance conditions for it. And when we looked at what we are doing is that we thought that we need to nudge students, help them, lure them in, and support them. And it was sort of a balancing act between the individual and the group. We wanted to give them space to explore, but also support for it. We wanted to make it fun and engaging, but we didn't want it to be light. We wanted to involve emotions, but it shouldn't feel like therapy. And we wanted them to bring their authentic self in, but also respect their privacy and help them with trust. So when we looked at that more closely, we created a framework for setting, and what we did was we created a space, and we looked at the atmosphere, we gave scaffolds, we gave process support, we facilitated it, and then the space became more of a holding space, and I'll walk you through it. So the atmosphere is about the vibe, the feel, the setting that participants experience, and that should support the learning, but also the social interaction and the motivation of the participants. We gave them scaffolds, that sort of tangible tools that help them, that's supportive and that they can use flexibly. We gave them process support, so we laid out breadcrumbs for them to follow the steps and help them to get through those steps. This designed materials, the elements that support this process. We facilitated it, and that's the interventions that you do or you don't do to make this work. The difference between the process support and the facilitation is that if we were to give a workshop together, we would have the same process support, but different types of facilitation. And next, there was the holding space. So we wanted to create a space that's non-judgmental, it's compassionate, where a person can be present with more of themselves. Loud. And a space that is left deliberately open and accessible for persons to move around in and explore. When you have this booklet, if you fold it completely open, I think many of you might have already done that. So there's this table with small elements that we have used. That's all kind of small stuff that we have taken into account. We have tried to facilitate, etc. This is work in progress. It's non-exhaustive, it's heterogeneous, it's overlapping, it's contradictive probably. You might have completely different way of organizing it. And it's intended to be inspirational and supportive. You don't need to checkbox everything if you want to make an activity more reflective, but it might help you to think about ideas that could help you out. I want to illustrate the whole setting idea with the campfire talk. And this is one of the most elaborate reflective exercises that we made. It's not to show and think about, every reflective intervention that you do need to be this elaborate, but it's a nice example where all these, the whole setting framework you can identify. The campfire talk is a peer-to-peer coaching game, a serious game. This is the board. that helps students have a constructive conversation amongst themselves. They identify an issue that they are dealing with. They name all the emotions involved. They explore it with open questions. They converge with insights and next steps. They revisit the emotions and they wrap up. That's just the steps of the game. And when you look at atmosphere, what we did was we embedded a metaphor. The metaphor of a campfire talk, where you have a different kind of conversation, but also the metaphor of being on a road, on traveling, where stuff can go wrong. I myself in Helsinki broke my phone. It's just happening and you need to deal with it. It's not so much my fault or a big problem. And we also let students introduce themselves with their favorite vacation. It tells you a lot more about someone if they say, well, I really like going into an all-inclusive cruise, or with their backpack into the mountains and completely alone. It gives you more information. So that's the atmosphere. The scaffolds is the next thing. That what we did in this, we gave them vocabulary for emotions. You see this big wheel here with all kinds of emotions. And when you need to think about how you're feeling, it's much more easy to make it a multiple choice question than to really come up with the emotions specifically. And we also gave them question guides with all kinds of open questions to help them have a discussion. And then we gave process support, and it's this kind of, I'll get one of them here, kind of boards where they have different roles. So every student got one role, with different attitudes that were printed on it and different steps that they needed to do. So this tangible material will help them go through the process of this conversation. And in the facilitation part, we designed this game around the fact that there are no facilitators around to supervise these kind of conversations. So it's self-supportive. But we also made the fire indicator, which you see here. And that's a non-verbal way of saying, maybe we should focus in a little bit different direction. So if the questions are very practical, you can say we need to spice this conversation up. Or if the questions are really too personal, or you see that it's not going well in that way, you can non-verbally say, well, might lighten it up a little. And that's much more easy than really stopping a conversation and speaking out. And with that, we created a bigger holding space where students could be with more of themselves. There was a buy-in in emotions. So not only the person who was experiencing the problem had said something about their emotions, but other people did as well. There was room for complexity because you could pinpoint more than one emotion at the same time. There's room for differences and time to dive deeper. And we deferred advice and judgment, so there was a more open space. Sorry. So getting to the end, we see this reflection in the reflective engineer program as something with a broad scope and in depth, which needs conditions to emerge, the process and the setting, the supportive setting. Time-wise, this might be interesting to connect your seeing the owl moment with the conditions of possibility, but I think I'll leave it for you to in your traveling home. And I want to say that, summarize it, that in this keynote I try to tell you that reflection can be a helpful tool in educating engineers, that you cannot just ask students to reflect by just asking them, or make students reflect by just asking them, that you can rethink and re-engineer reflection into reflection with a broad scope and depth. It can emerge, and that can emerge from combining the process of reflection and the setting of reflection, and together we think that it's the conditions of possibility. So what are future steps? This is work in progress. I think it's still on the cognitive side, the whole framework and the whole reflection. It's partly by design, because I think that works better in engineering than when we have an embodied approach. It's interesting to look at how you design this for a whole curriculum, and also what professional development is needed for educators. So I'm really looking forward to have a dialogue about this and also starting to do research on it. The last thing I want to share, so my final thought from the perspective that this is the first time that I've shared this framework and this work with anyone in a broader audience. And I really like that it's with you in the SEFI community, of which I really feel part of. And I thank you for the opportunity and the attention that you have. And also being reflective myself, I see a lot of room for improvement. An interesting question that might arise and how you experience it, but it's also been a lot of hard work. And I also know that this is not my work alone. I had luck, I had support, and it had teamwork. And I really want to acknowledge these two, Sjoerd and Paula, who are my amazing colleagues. And this work could not have been done without them. And also the amazing teaching assistant, Karin Maarten, and our office manager, Claudia, who also really helped me in making this work. And these are other people's, because I also had support. I had people helping me, challenge me, give me ideas, give me language, root for me or supported me in any way. So I really want them to be acknowledged here as well. These were my final thoughts. For the final thoughts of you, I hand you this Delft blue tile with some questions, and you can fill them out on your way home. So thank you for your attention.
I think this is the biggest applause that we have had in this conference.
Thank you.
And thank you, Pleun, from also my side. It was really interesting, timely, important topic. So now we have time for questions, comments, ideas. Yes, there is.
Thank you. It was a great talk. One puzzle I have, and I think you're further along the journey than I am, is that we often can find these reflections in a 2 or 3 hour workshop and then struggle to observe their impact longitudinally. And I always worry that the reflection in the moment is very powerful, but then it fizzles out afterwards. So have you been thinking about this? And I'm super curious to hear what kind of thoughts you have on it.
And I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly, but are you asking that what does one reflective exercise do in the long run, or is that?
Yeah, how do you deal with sort of powerful moments, but then people getting out of that setting and then that motivation fizzle out?
Yeah, I think that's very relevant, and I think that one of the things that is important is that this moment is not only about the workshop itself, but really translated to another context. And maybe I didn't stress that really, but it's interesting, for example, with this example that I had with the fictive characters. Some people really said, well, I see that I'm really like following the rules. That was actually one of the persons doing that saying that. And he said, now I also understand that why I don't have a problem with the examination board, but I do have a problem with, for example, support staff who require me to be a little bit more flexible. So we really try to get that transfer in place as well. So not keep it only in the moment itself and in the bubble of the workshop, but really make them translated to their context. And also allowing it for the different contexts of different participants. Yeah, hope that answers your question.
Great. Some more questions? Yes, there. Now, Tia, you have a long way. There in the very up, in the last corner.
Maybe 2 microphones?
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the disruption that you mentioned as a part of reflection, because as far as I understood, the successful reflection is kind of based on disruption being actually a disruption and not students answering the question the way that they think that they should answer it. Could you elaborate a bit more on how you would like to make sure that the disruption actually happens in the process? Because that's the thing that I was missing here.
I'm sorry, it's really difficult to understand what you're saying.
You mentioned that disruption is a part of the whole process in the beginning, before the dialogue happens. And my question is, how do you make sure that the disruption happens? That students don't just think that they answer the question the way that they think that they should.
How do you make sure? One way that we try to make sure, and it's indeed trying, we had these wonderful teaching assistants who really tried it out. So they helped me, and we got feedback, and we also really imagined different types of students, different backgrounds, asked the teachers themselves. So we really try to immerse ourselves in their context. And it's also about doing your best, and sometimes it's not happening. But at the same time, we also know that if we give them a written exercise, we also don't know if real reflection is happening. So we tried our best in the design to make it disruptive in an okay way, so not to have them in a complete crisis, but more of a sort of mini crisis. And by testing it out, doing it iteratively, all that kind of aspects. But you're right, that's definitely a point where you need to look at and be careful with. There's a question.
Great. Then there is the next one in the next row. So.
Thank you. I was just wondering, in kind of personal space and your own life, maybe, and have you been thinking if any physical exercise or the opposite, the meditation or yoga, could bring that space for reflection? What have you even considered that in your current work? Or that's what I found, for example, works when you are exhausted or you are the opposite, relaxed and breathing right and so on. So I don't know, what was your either experience or research thoughts?
I'm not sure, because I'm looking at the transcripts also. It's really hard to understand what people are saying from that microphone for me, apparently. It might be Yes,
it's like body-soul connection, right? So physical exercise, can it also bring in that disruption moment? You see what I mean? So how to connect the body, physical, because you talk about physical space.
I think that would be amazing if we were able to do that, and I think that's really relevant. What we did try to do is make them aware about bodily clues, but that is a really thin line, we noticed. So when I was working, and then I know that I asked something, and how does your body feel? And the students, they say, well, no, we're not going to answer that question. And that's why it's really necessary to work together with students to have the language right. I think that would be amazing, and it might be much more easier if you translate this to fields of dance performers, etc., because they're already doing that. But I think that's definitely hard in engineering education, but might be my bias. But I want to go there, but I didn't really go there yet. I think it's even more difficult. But good point.
All right. Thank you. First of all, wonderful. I loved it. Also, as a very brief feedback, I have been implementing stuff you have been sharing at, I think, Barcelona, and it works quite well. So what I do and what I think is very valuable is to... Sorry, still hard time?
Yeah, still, sorry.
All right, I try it like that. Maybe it does work a bit better if I yell, but still use the mic. So I have been trying to, and I have actually successfully implementing some of those measures that you proposed at, I think, Barcelona. And it was about AI for promotions. And I have students reflect on that, and I have them reflect on it later on in a written manner as well in a learning journal. And what works really well, and I was wondering, because I tried to use a taxonomy, Smith and Patton from 95, I think, from descriptive levels of reflection to critical reflection. And if you use any of those rubrics as well, if that could be something to, foster reflection.
I think it's true, and it's also a form of process support, right? That they know what is expected of them and also helps them to do it. It's great. Yeah, it's a great example. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Great, we still have some time there. Yes, Tia noticed.
Hello, I just want to thank you for holding space, which is so important in doing this work, to give it such a broad attention in an engineering community. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
Did you, Tia? Yes, you did see some hands or hand. Yes, there is then also the other hand next, yes.
I just have a quick question about talking to Pippi Longstocking.
Yeah.
I would like you to just say a little bit more. I think I missed the point you were making with that particular piece, and I think I have some ideas, but I'd like to hear why that's so important again.
And why the importance of the dialogue or the Pippi
Well, the
Longstocking?
dialogue with Pippi as opposed to the dialogue with the person next to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. It's a good question. I think what is happening at that point is that you have this Pippi, we brought these physical props, and that really helps them to imagine things. And what's happening is that you have different discussions going on at the same time. And I'll use an example where we had Barbie. So people were thinking about the same example, for example, like what I do when I feel that I'm getting ill, but I still have deadlines. And they had Barbie across the street and in the chair across them, and they said the younger women or the younger people said, Barbie, she's a power woman, and she can definitely make this work. So she will just ask some of her friends and have it organized. Women from the generation before that, they said, well, she's just a party girl. She will just go away, think, I don't care about my work. So what you saw is that there immediately were like different approaches to the same registered trademark, like Barbie. But also, it's much more easier to project things on something that is not in you. You're not accountable for the things that Pippi is thinking. So it helps you to be more creative and imaginative. I hope that answers your question.
Then we have that one more question there. Yes. And I guess then we have used our time, but please.
Hi, Pleun.
Hi.
My question is about Campfire Talk. And I'm wondering, you said it's a self-facilitated game, and that's great, because I think at the moment we perhaps don't have the capacity and people trained to kind of deliver the kind of coaching and mentoring facilitation. Do you see value in capacity building in that space to kind of train academics to deliver these kind of interventions? And then my second question, if I may, is I understand that this is an open resource and we can kind of print it, but is there a physical board coming soon, and where can we get our hands on it?
Okay. The first question is about, do I see also the need for educators to be trained in facilitating these conversations? Yes, but the thing is, this was developed. The start of it was because I saw so many graduating students really struggling with this process. And they were almost in despair by thinking, this is the hardest thing that I ever need to do. And I also saw that so many supervisors were having students who were having a problematic process in this graduating phase, but also felt unable to really coach them in the process part. It was only on content. And we know that these supervisors are pressed for time. They might not see the value of these kind of conversations. It's also people in passing sometimes. A lot of it are PhDs who supervise these graduate students. So it is one way of doing it is indeed helping them do a professional development in this, and that's also already happening. But I really wanted to make the agency within the people themselves and design around the fact that there are a lot of people who are not interested in giving this kind of support to the students. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, well, things in academia go slowly, but I now got the permission to indeed start producing it and then also maybe selling it. I'm not sure how, that's not my expertise, the commercial bit. So if there's someone who thinks, well, I know a lot of that, I'm interested. But indeed, I think it's indeed open source, you can print it out, but this is, the feel and the touch of it is just more nicely to work with. So it's coming. Yeah, I'm allowed to now. That's progress.
Okay, great. We are about running out of our time, and the discussion could continue like forever. So please contact Pleun afterwards and discuss with her. You can continue. But now let's thank Pleun, and there is Hannu-Matti ready. Are you ready?
This is not surprise. This is Moominmog again. And now you all know something about Moomins. They are cartoons, but they are actually, in the original form, very philosophical. And I think Pleun should read one of the books.
Okay. Great, and we have many interesting sessions and presentations waiting still today, but first, let's have some coffee. So great, thank you. And you did manage the time perfectly. Oh, great. And the people are wanting to discuss more. My God, question. Yes. Yeah. Hi. Hi. Professor from Tampere University. Yeah, I like your work very much. Do you have any plan to replicate the software app and distribute all over the world? What kind of software? I mean, the app is like an application we can use in the mobile phone.
I think that it is an interesting question, and I mean, there's so many different interventions that are made, and I think what I'm making it needs to be very context specific. And I think there are definitely ways to also do that. I'm not sure. I think that part I also this thought about making this game in an online zone.
Yeah.
That could be interesting, but I have not really looked into it.
Okay, because I'm making computer science. If you any plan to do that, I can help you with that.
That would be nice.
I will send you an email.
Yeah, please do that.
Thank you very much.
Also maybe make a link.
Okay, thank you.
This is our colleague.
Okay.
Great.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Also, use your would like to use model in your teaching or student?
Yeah, well, in my teaching, most of it now, I'm much more working on innovating and teaching myself. So what I try to do is have other people, the materials there, just pick it up. Yeah. So I try to see what is a relevant part of students really need to finish, and then I create an intervention that facilitates that. So I start with the problems that are there, and I really want it, whatever is needed. So assume you have something that you want your teacher to work with. I would go consider you and think, okay, how can we make this work? What kind of students do you have? What kind of time do you have? And then I would try to come up with something, with innovation that would help.
Mitä? Joo, mä nyt sain ton closing ceremonin.